We got the second of the leadership contenders for the Conservative Party, of course, are in the throes of recovering from their biggest election defeat ever. I'm very pleased to welcome to the programme Mel Stride. Mel, welcome.
Thank you, Nick. Good afternoon.
Well, a pleasure to have you joining us. Thank you for giving up your Sunday. I expect you're very busy. There's hustings all over the country and all sorts of things going on.
Yeah.
Mel, even though I was in Parliament with you very briefly, I was looking a little bit about your background. You were born in Ealing in London. I'm assuming this source is correct. You grew up basically in a working class family and you attended, I think it's Portsmouth Grammar School. You've done very well and you have this interesting backstory that most people think Tories don't have. You're also coming up with ideas, and yet you remain, if we are to believe all the evidence, you remain the outsider. How can you close the gap?
Well, when people say I'm the outsider, Nick, what they don't know the answer to, of course, is where are the parliamentary MPs on these candidates? And I don't think anybody fully knows the answer to that, because the first round, of course, is going to be early September. It'll take 6 candidates down to 4. And I think I'm well placed amongst MPs to end up in the final 4. Then it goes into this period running up to conference and presenting at conference. Now, look, Nick, think of David Cameron. You could get 25 to 1 on David Cameron a week before he gave that conference speech, which, of course, changed everything. So I'm the dark horse and I'm coming up on the rails.
And you seem to be enjoying that rule. Unlike some of your colleagues, you're very much out there on the front foot doing interviews, and I'm grateful for that. Before we get to some perhaps more pressing questions with you, I'd like to, if I may, I get the sense that lots of people are, yes, they want to understand what direction, what values you have as a leader that you would bring to the Conservative Party, but you're also coming up with specific policy ideas as well. Which do you think makes more impression? For example, you've just launched Head Start scheme, which is aimed at young people. But do you think people are actually paying more attention to things like that, or they just want to know, who's Mel Stride? What does he stand for? Is he a Conservative?
So I think, Nick, that the key challenge here for a new leader of the opposition is to rebuild our party. And that is less actually about lots of policy ideas up front, because we've got 5 years before the next general election to come up with the right platform on the policy side, albeit there are some immediate pressures actually to improve our organisation as a fighting machine for the May local government elections. But on these issues, therefore, of what you need somebody who's going to be a leader. Now, you mentioned my background. You're absolutely right. I came from a family in which my parents actually left school at 15 and 14 years old. I was fortunate enough to go to a direct grammar school where I had a free place. I got a place into Oxford University, and I ran with that opportunity as far and as fast as I possibly could, and I didn't look back once. And I remember Maggie Thatcher saying, if you've got a good education, the whole world lies before you. I then set up my own businesses, and I don't mean joining other people's companies to help out. I mean sitting at the kitchen table, having a plan, putting those plans together, building teams of people, and climbing those proverbial business mountains. And I did that in the UK and in the United States. And I went into Parliament when I was 48 years old, which is quite long in the tooth, actually, to go into Parliament. And most people tell me that's a huge advantage. They want people that have gone out there in the real world and shown leadership. Now, that leadership is what the party needs now. We need to unite, and I believe that I can do that with the parliamentary party. And we need to drive the change, which is going to create the policy platform, which is going to help win us the next election.
Okay.
I spent 18 months, very quickly, Nick, as the Secretary of State for Work and Pensions. In that time, I saved billions of pounds from the welfare budget, and I saw hundreds of thousands of people on that journey into work who previously would have been on benefits. That's the kind of leadership and dynamic change that I can bring to the party.
OK, let's just go back to the question of unity, because I think every candidate is talking about unity, and I'm going to put the same question to you that I will put and have put to others. If you look at the broad picture of 6 candidates, it strikes an observer like me that you've got perhaps half of those candidates looking to occupy the space of reform, and then you've got candidates like yourself, like Tom, who I would say are not looking to occupy that space. They're taking more, let's call it middle ground, for want of a better description. How will you be able to unite a party of MPs who clearly there seem to be at least two wings to how the party should go forward?
So we've got to appeal to and win back and respect those people that went to reform. Now, incidentally, not all of them would have come to us. About 20% of them would otherwise have voted Labour or Liberal Democrat, and many would not have come to us even if a reform didn't exist. They'd have stayed at home. We've got to do that, and we've got to, as you suggest, lean into Labour and the Liberal Democrats. Now, the way we do that is by reaching out on the issues that matter to reform voters. So clearly migration, illegal migration, lower taxes, for example, are going to be really important. Now, I don't associate those as issues of the right, for example. I think they are common ground issues that if you poll Liberal Democrats, for example, on things like illegal migration, they want to see that brought under control. So I think these are common ground issues where we can make our case to win back from both sides. But the big thing here, Nick, is you described, or I just set out, my background, where I've come from, how education transformed my life, how business transformed my life. Those are very conservative. That's a very conservative journey. Those conservative values of aspiration, opportunity, achievement, that is the flame that we've got to burn more brightly going forward. Now, that is fundamentally an economic question, because if you're to do things that cut taxes, you've got to have an economy that works and has the fiscal space to do that. Now, I saved billions of pounds in welfare. When we went into the last election with our manifesto, we said we would scrap national insurance altogether, a huge tax cut. That was funded in large part by the reforms that I was driving through. So I know how to do it. But if we're to get that flame of authentic conservatism burning bright again, we've got to get the economy right. And I have the plan to do that.
OK, you were very critical in the wake of the riots of Nigel Farage and Elon Musk over their contributions to the debate. I want to paraphrase you here. You talked about Nigel Farage fanning the flames, I think, of some of the riots, or if I paraphrased you wrong there, do correct me.
Not quite, but similar.
Well, by all means, do put the record
very irresponsible and very unhelpful, his intention.
Many people have speculated that actually the only way for the right to come to power again is for a deal to be done with reform, whether that means merger or not. What is your view, or as a potential leader of the party, of what to do about Nigel and reform?
So what we've got to do is win the battle of ideas. And now that is about what I described, reaching out to those voters, very much respecting the views that they have and addressing those. We've talked about migration, illegal migration, and getting taxes down, for example. But we should have no truck with Nigel Farage. Nigel Farage is effectively a populist. OK, now a lot of people hear the word populist and they think, oh, well, that's because he's got popular policies that people want. That may be true to an extent. But populism actually means setting one group up against another. So if we go back to your point about the riots, what Nigel Farage did was to step in and question the truthfulness of the police at the time that those terrible events happened in Southport. Okay, he planted the seeds of doubt about whether the police were being honest with the public, and that did up the ante and make things worse. He also made a link between Southport and that terrible attack that there had been on a uniformed officer in Kent, and whether terrorism had been involved. Once again, planting doubt as to the motives of authority, in this case, the police. But it goes wider than that. It goes to the intelligence services, it goes to government, etc. There's always this setting up, sometimes subtly, of the bogeyman that's against the people, and Nigel Farage is there to stand up for the people. That's the kind of populism that I don't want to see in this country. You see it in other parts of the world, and I don't want to see it here. But we have to defeat Nigel Farage on the ideas, on coming up with the right policies. And I believe under my leadership, I'll be able to unite the party and come up with the right answer to do just that.
Well, thank you for that very clear statement on where you stand on that. Can I ask you something about what I thought were your, this is going to sound sycophantic, but there's a punch to it. Your heroic efforts during the general election to be the front man of the general election. We saw more of you than we saw of Rishi Sunak on the broadcast media. But isn't, in some ways, your absolute loyalty and being a team player and supporting Rishi Sunak, doesn't that make it difficult for you to make the break with what most voters probably regard as a dysfunctional, underachieving government?
The past is the past, Nick. The future is the future. That's what we've got to look to. But you make the point about going out there and putting my head above the parapet. That's what people look for in leaders. Now, when my party was under huge pressure, there was a massive amount of incoming fire. We had made several major mistakes during that election campaign. There was no doubt about it. I was the person that stood up and said, right, I will go out and I will fight for us tooth and nail, and I will do whatever I can to save as many seats for my party as I possibly can. And we knew, and I knew, we weren't going to win the general election, far from it, but it could have been even worse than it was, actually. There were predictions of being down at 70, 72 seats or thereabouts. But no, it was a mark of who I am, that when the call to arms came, I stood up and I was counted.
Now, let me ask you about this. This is only going to interest a small section of the country, but given your electorate, i.e. first the MPs and then the members, should you get through to the last two, it is crucial. I have never known a time, but it's been probably for 3 or 4 years, when CCHQ, the headquarters of the Conservative Party, has been so dysfunctional, so out of touch, poured scorn on the membership, I'd go so far as to say, long since I left Parliament I'm talking about. Are you going to tinker with CCHQ headquarters, or are you proposing radical reform to make it a fighting machine that values and respects members? A little caveat there, I have call after call telling me I don't want to be a member of the Conservative Party. They don't value their members.
No, this is a huge thing, and I think it's fair to say I was the first candidate to raise this whole issue of reform of the party. Okay, there are several strands to this. One is, you mentioned members. Look, if you join a membership organisation, yes, you might expect them to come to you periodically and ask for some money, and that's part of being a member, is raising funds. But this endless stream of demands for cash coming by email has just irritated a lot of people. Membership should be about value, and I actually think, Nick, we can learn, dare I say it, dare I utter those words, from the trade unions about how to construct an offer for your membership. There should be benefits and a form of involvement in membership that makes people want to join. The second thing is, we have got to absolutely put an end to parachuting in parliamentary candidates at the last minute and imposing them on associations. Members must choose those that are going to stand for Parliament, and we need to be getting people in about 4 years plus ahead of a general election. The final point I'd make, Nick, and this is the most important in many ways, is that what we've got to do is turn ourselves into a really sharp fighting machine, and we've got to do it quickly because we have local elections in May. And what that means is learning to some degree from other parties without being too proud about it. We may disagree with what they say, but we were outgunned when it came to the digital campaign by Labour, and we, on the ground, often were not performing at the levels of parties like the Liberal Democrats. Now, we can do that by getting the right people involved at the centre and getting a system where you get the research side, the rebuttal side, and the digital campaigning machine working together. And the litmus test of success, Nick, will be that as leader, I should be able to walk into that unit and say, right, let's take Devon as a county. I want to know what are the issues that are going on locally at the moment. I want to know what is the position that the opposition councillors are taking on those issues. And I want to see the digital ammunition that you are providing to our people on the ground to take those issues on. And if I don't get a strong answer on those, then we're not delivering. Now, we're quite a long way from that. In fact, we're a very long way from that. But it is not impossible to get that sorted out relatively quickly. It
sounds like an updated version of what used to be very efficient was the Conservative Research Department. But let me move away from that. Are you happy to take a couple of quick-fire questions that have come in on message, on Messenger? First of all, will Mel Stride leave the EHRR?
So there are some issues, Nick, and that is one of them, in which we need to come to a consensus across the parliamentary party on this. And anybody who wins the membership over and becomes leader of the opposition on the basis of painting themselves into a stark position on that kind of issue will go back to parliamentary colleagues, some of whom will not be prepared to be as supportive as they would otherwise be. The principle, though, is I'm very clear on. There must not be anything that stands in the way of us being able to deliver an effective deterrent to stop illegal migration occurring. So it may be derogations from, reform of, changes to, it may be leaving, etc. But we should not prejudge that. And the other thing is, we are 5 years away from a general election, okay? These are issues that can be settled amongst the parliamentary party under the new leadership. And that's the correct sequencing for tackling that kind of issue.
Just one more that's come in. I'll paraphrase the question. It's saying, Mel's just talked about taxation and lower taxation and the right to keep your own money. How does he explain that the Conservatives have presided over the largest tax increases for over 50 years?
So the main answer to that is the fact that we had once in a generation external shocks to the UK economy. We had COVID, which shrank the UK economy by 10% overnight. And we had a cost of living crisis that visited our shores because of the war in Ukraine and its effect on energy prices. What we had to do was step in and support millions of families and businesses up and down the country through that. It cost £400 billion. We are a fiscally responsible party, and that means we don't run out and just borrow that 400 billion. We had to have a fiscally responsible way of paying that down. And that did indeed mean, certainly for a period, a rise in taxes. By the time we'd finished, actually, we were bringing taxes down, Nick. You'll remember we reduced national insurance quite significantly. And in fact, if you're on average earnings of about £34,000, the marginal change in your marginal tax rate was actually at the lowest that it had been for over half a century at that point. And that takes into account even the frozen tax thresholds that people often point to. So we were doing things to bring taxes down. We can go still further, and I know how we can do that.
Mel, we could talk for a long time. I hope you'll come back to us. It's going to be a long contest. Thank you very much indeed